Legislation and safety guidelines from the Health and Safety Executive, HSE. Interpreted by H&W Training to ensure the safe and efficient operation of the chainsaw. You must understand your responsibility in regard to a variety of legislation and HSE industry guidance. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, sometimes referred to as HASAW 1974, is an Act of Parliament that sets out the framework for managing workplace health and safety in the UK. This imposes broad obligations on employers to protect employee safety at work, such as by maintaining safe plant, safe work methods, and those undertaking or in control of work equipment. Employers must also give personnel with the necessary instruction, training, and supervision to ensure their safety. Employees and self-employed people must take reasonable precautions to avoid being injured at work. Employers, self-employed people and employees must not jeopardize the health and safety of others. Anyone who knowingly or deliberately interferes with or misuses material provided under a legal obligation in the interest of health, safety, or welfare is subject to prosecution under this Act. The Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations of 1999 are a set of regulations that govern the management of health and safety at MHSWR. The MHSWR's goal is to define how businesses must manage the process of safeguarding the health and safety of their employees and those who may be harmed by their work activity. Precautions must be based on risk assessments conducted by competent individuals and properly documented. Certain safeguards, as well as information and training needs, are indicated. The Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations of 1998 Pure's goal is to ensure that work equipment, regardless of its age, condition, or origin, does not pose a health and safety risk. Regulation 9 Training. Adequate operator training is required for any activity utilizing chainsaws to be completed safely. Anyone working with chainsaws on or in trees must have a certificate of competence or a national qualification related to the activity they do as of December 5, 1998. Under Pure regulations, agricultural holdings are subject to certain and limited exceptions. Even if the obligation for maintenance is transferred to someone else, the operator should always have access to the chainsaw's manufacturer's instruction manual for checks and operation. The Manual Handling Operations Regulations were enacted in 1992 to minimize musculoskeletal diseases affecting muscles, joints, tendons, and ligaments. Proper lifting process is critical when doing chainsaw-related activities. This comprises heavy material lifting, carrying, pushing, tugging, and maneuvering. This course does not replace obligatory manual handling training, which must be obtained separately. Code of conduct that has been approved. ACOPS. Employers can use ACOPS to get practical advice on how to comply with the law. Although failing to comply with any requirement of an ACOPS is not an offense in and of itself, a court may use such failure as evidence in criminal proceedings that a person has violated the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations. Guidance on industry best practices. Current industry best practices are outlined in relevant recommendations. The HSE updates the guidance on a regular basis to ensure that it remains relevant to your business, and it can be used as a safety checklist at work to ensure that chainsaw operations are carried out properly. 1981 Regulations on first aid at work. In addition to the personal first aid kit carried by all operators, a first aid kit must be accessible on site for all chainsaw operations. The first aid kit should be sized appropriately for the number of people on site, and it should be inspected and replenished by a designated person. An update to BS 8599-1 to 2019 means that new BSI first aid kit rules are in force. There are two new additions: a critical injury pack for a severe life-threatening bleed. The critical injury pack is designed to provide immediate, Life-saving first aid to someone who has sustained a severe bleeding injury in the workplace. Every second counts when dealing with a catastrophic bleed, and action needs to be taken before emergency services arrive. This can make the difference between life and death. Currently, standard first aid kits are not equipped appropriately to stem such a bleed. The HSE now recommends in high-risk environments that employers provide hemostatic dressings and tourniquets in their first aid kits, where it is possible that trauma could occur. Any accidents that necessitate the use of the first aid kit should be documented appropriately, such as in the accident book. Personal Protective Equipment at Work Regulations of 1992 amended 2022 are a set of regulations that govern the use of personal protective equipment. All PPE provided must be CE certified and conform with the PPE regulations. Legislation governing the environment. These documents explains how chainsaw activities affect the environment. The Wildlife and Countryside Amendment Act 1991 has ramifications. The Badger Protection Act of 1992. The 2000 Countryside and Rights of Way Act, Habitat and Species Conservation Regulations of 2010. The Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act of 2006 was enacted to protect the natural environment and rural communities. The European Protected Species Directive was enacted in 2007. COSH, Control of Substances Hazardous to Health. In chainsaw operations, you'll be working with substances and materials that are potentially harmful to your health. Oils, fuels, coolants, spores, sap, fumes, and dust from the chainsaw, as well as other pollutants on the wood to be processed, will be included. You should have access to paperwork that identifies potentially hazardous substances, the health risks they pose, and the steps you must take to avoid harm. Control Noise at Work Regulations of 2005. Employers are required by the Control of Noise at Work Regulations to prevent or reduce health and safety risks associated with noise exposure at work. Employers must comply with the following regulations: assess the risks of noise at work to employees, take steps to reduce the noise exposure that causes those risks, provide employees with hearing protection if other methods fail to reduce noise exposure sufficiently, ensure that the legal limits on noise exposure are not exceeded. Control of Vibration at Work Regulations 2005. By law, employers must assess and identify measures to eliminate or reduce risks from exposure to hand-arm vibration so that employees can be protected from risks to their health. Where the risks are low, the actions taken may be simple and inexpensive, but where the risks are high, they should be managed by using a prioritized action plan to control exposure to hand-arm vibration. What is hand-arm vibration? Hand-arm vibration is vibration transmitted from work processes into operators' hands and arms. It can be caused by operating handheld powered work equipment, such as chainsaws. Too much exposure to hand-arm vibration can cause hand-arm vibration syndrome (HAVS) and carpal tunnel syndrome (CTS). What is hand-arm vibration syndrome (HAVS)? HAVS affects the nerves, blood vessels, muscles and joints of the hand, wrist and arm. It can become severely disabling if ignored. It includes vibration white finger, which can cause severe pain in the affected fingers. What is carpal tunnel syndrome, CTS? Carpal tunnel syndrome is a nerve disorder which may involve pain, tingling, numbness and weakness in parts of the hand, and can be caused by, among other things, exposure to vibration. When is it hazardous? Regular and frequent exposure to hand-arm vibration can lead to permanent health effects. This is most likely when contact with a vibrating tool or work process is a regular part of a person's job. Occasional exposure is unlikely to cause ill health. How can I control the risks from HAVS? You can reduce vibration exposure by reducing one or both of the vibration transmitted to the hand, the time spent holding vibrating equipment or workpieces. How can I help reduce the risks? It is your employer's responsibility to protect you against HAVs and CTS, but you should help by asking your employer if your job could be done in a different way without using vibrating tools and machines. If this cannot happen, ask to use suitable low vibration tools. Always use the right tool for each job, to do the job more quickly and expose you to less hand-arm vibration. Check tools before using them to make sure they have been properly maintained and repaired to avoid increased vibration caused by faults or general wear. Make sure cutting tools are kept sharp so that they remain efficient. Reduce the amount of time you use a tool in one go, by doing other jobs in between. Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations gives recommendations on risk assessment in the workplace in Regulation 3. What is the definition of risk assessment? A risk assessment is a thorough review of what in your workplace potentially cause people harm so that you can determine if you have taken adequate safeguards or should take further steps to avoid harm. Workers and others have a right to be safeguarded from harm caused by a failure to implement appropriate controls. Accidents and illness can destroy lives and have a negative impact on you or your employer's business if output is lost, machinery is damaged, insurance prices rise. Employers are obligated by law to analyze the hazards in your workplace so that a plan may be put in place to mitigate such risks. A written risk assessment, which may include the processes listed below, should be provided. Step 1. Identify the hazards. This should be done for each site, work, and machine separately. Step 2. Determine who might be hurt and how they might be harmed. Step 3. Evaluate the risks and decide on precautions. Step 4. Record your findings and implement them. Step 5. Review your assessment and update if necessary. As part of the risk assessment, emergency procedures should be documented and made available to all workers. They may include the following: OS grid reference, containing grid letters, for example SK 123123. Place name, including postcode if appropriate. A designated meeting location, useful for remote access to guide the emergency services to the worksite. Type of access. Acceptable helicopter landing place. Address and phone number of nearest accident and emergency hospital. Public road. Vehicles type, 4-wheel drive. And your personal contact information, on-site contact information. Well done on completing chainsaw legislation and safety guidelines. Please try the quiz to confirm your knowledge. If you have any incorrect answers on the quiz, we will take you back to the video part which contains the answer.